The community center buzzed with forced cheerfulness as Mark Jensen adjusted his cheap tie and scanned the crowd. 41 years old, graying at the temples, wearing the same polyester blend shirt he'd worn to every town function for the past 3 years. Assistant manager at Walmart didn't exactly scream success, but it paid the bills after the police department had restructured him out of a job. He spotted Nina across the room, her auburn hair catching the fluorescent lights as she laughed at something Logan Price was whispering in her ear. Too close, too intimate. Mark's cop instincts, dormant for years behind retail scheduling and inventory reports, suddenly sparked to life. Nina, his wife of 16 years, mother to Daisy and Henry, stood with her hand resting on Logan's muscled forearm. The gym owner's carnivorous smile made Mark's stomach clench. Logan Price, the town's golden boy with his MMA gym and his BS motivational speeches about conquering your demons. Mark grabbed a plastic cup of punch and positioned himself near the men's locker room entrance, close enough to hear conversations, but far enough to remain invisible. Small-town fundraisers were perfect for gathering intelligence. Everyone got loose-lipped after a few beers. "Dude, you're playing with fire," someone said from inside the locker room. Logan's voice, confident and cocky. "Fire's what makes life interesting. Besides, she's practically mine already. Husband's a damn retail drone. Can't compete with what I'm offering." "What about the kids?" another voice asked. "Kids adapt. Hell, the daughter already thinks daddy's a loser. Mom's been laying that groundwork for months," Logan replied. Mark's hands trembled as he set down his cup. The conversation continued, but his ears were ringing. Nina had been laying groundwork? How long had this been going on? He waited until Logan emerged, then followed him at a distance. Logan strutted back to Nina, sliding his arm around her waist with the casual possession of someone who'd done it 100 times before. Nina didn't pull away, she leaned into him. 14-year-old Daisy appeared at Nina's side, rolling her eyes as she spotted Mark across the room. "Mom, can we go? Dad's doing his creepy staring thing again." Nina's laugh was musical, but her eyes were cold when they met Mark's. "Give him a few minutes, honey. He'll find someone else to bother." The words hit like a physical blow. His own wife, dismissing him in front of their daughter and her lover. Mark excused himself and walked to his car, his mind already working. 20 years as a cop had taught him that the best evidence came from the source. If Nina was playing games, she'd have tools. Burner phones, secret emails, hidden communications. He just needed to find them. The next morning, while Nina was at her physical therapy clinic and the kids were at school, Mark searched their bedroom with methodical precision. Nothing obvious. Nina was smarter than that. But in her gym bag, tucked into a side pocket, he found a small voice recorder she used for patient notes. Perfect. Mark replaced the recorder with an identical model, one he'd modified with extended battery life and remote activation. If Nina was going to destroy their family, she was going to provide the evidence herself. 3 days later, he activated the device remotely while Nina was at the gym. The first recording was routine, Nina talking to herself about grocery lists and appointment schedules. The second recording made his blood run cold. Nina said, "I love you too, Logan. God, I can't believe how long I waited to feel this way again. Mark's just existing. He's not living, he's not passionate about anything except his stupid job. You make me feel alive." Logan's voice, muffled but clear, said, "He's never going to give you what you deserve. When are you going to stop pretending and make this real?" Nina replied, "Soon. I just need to make sure the kids understand that this isn't about them. Daisy's already on board. She sees how unhappy her father makes me. Henry's going to be harder, but..." Logan interrupted, asking, "But what?" Nina answered, "But he'll adjust. Kids are resilient." Mark sat alone in his car in the Walmart parking lot, listening to his wife plan their family's destruction with the casual indifference of someone discussing weekend plans. The woman he'd loved since college, the mother of his children, was systematically poisoning their lives. He powered off the recording and stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The tired, defeated man looking back at him was someone he didn't recognize. When had he become so pathetic that his own wife felt justified in betraying him? But underneath the hurt and humiliation, something else was stirring. Something cold and calculating that he'd thought he'd left behind with his badge and Colt. Mark Jensen, the retail drone, was about to die. What emerged from his ashes would be something Nina and Logan had never encountered. A man with nothing left to lose and all the skills necessary to destroy them both. Mark began his investigation the way he'd approached every case during his police career. Methodically, systematically, and with ruthless attention to detail. He established a timeline, identified key players, and started building a comprehensive picture of Nina and Logan's betrayal. The bank records were the first breakthrough. Nina had been hiding small cash withdrawals for 8 months, never enough to trigger suspicious activity reports, but consistent enough to fund a secret life. $40 here, $60 there, all adding up to nearly $3,000 in untraceable spending. Her phone records revealed a pattern of deleted calls to a number registered to a prepaid account. When Mark ran the number through his old police contacts, it traced back to a convenience store 3 towns over, the kind of place that sold burner phones to people who valued anonymity. But the real intelligence came from human sources. Small towns thrived on gossip, and Mark had spent enough years in uniform to know who talked and who listened. Linda Morrison, Nina's best friend from the PTA, was a notorious socialite with a tendency to overshare after her 3rd glass of wine. Mark waited outside the grocery store where Linda shopped every Thursday, timing his approach for maximum casual encounter value. Mark called out, "Linda, how's Michael's baseball season going?" Linda's smile was forced, uncomfortable. She knew something. Linda replied, "Oh, Mark, hi, it's going fine. How are you holding up?" Mark noticed the phrasing and thought to himself, interesting phrasing. Holding up with what? Linda's face flushed as she said, "I just meant, with everything that's been... I should go. I've got frozen food in the car." She hurried away, but not before Mark caught the pity in her eyes. Linda Morrison knew about the affair, which meant other people knew, which meant Nina hadn't been as discreet as she thought. At home, the atmosphere had grown toxic. Daisy barely spoke to him anymore, spending most of her time texting or on video calls with friends. When she did acknowledge his presence, it was with the kind of exaggerated eye-rolling that suggested she'd been coached to see him as an embarrassment. Daisy said one evening, gesturing at his Walmart polo, "Dad, can you not wear that shirt to my school concert? It's humiliating." Mark asked, "What's wrong with my shirt?" Daisy answered, "Everything. Mom says you've given up on yourself. She says successful people dress for the job they want, not the job they have." Nina, folding laundry nearby, didn't look up. Nina said, "I was just trying to help him improve his professional image." Mark snapped, "By telling our daughter that her father is a failure?" Nina responded, "I never said that." Mark replied, "You didn't have to." Henry, quiet and observant at 12, watched the exchange with worried eyes. Unlike his sister, Henry seemed to sense the undercurrents of tension without fully understanding their source. That night, Mark expanded his surveillance operation. He installed a GPS tracker on Nina's car, legally, since both their names were on the registration. He created fake social media accounts to monitor Logan's online activity. He began documenting every interaction, every suspicious behavior, every small betrayal. The pattern that emerged was devastating in its calculation. Nina hadn't just fallen into an affair. She'd been systematically undermining their marriage for months. She'd trained Daisy to see Mark as inadequate. She'd isolated him from mutual friends by spreading subtle criticisms about his negativity and lack of ambition. She'd created a narrative where he was the problem and she was the sufferer. Logan, meanwhile, was posting gym selfies with increasingly bold captions about conquering new territories and claiming what's rightfully yours. His social media followers included half the married women in town, all leaving flirty comments that he encouraged with strategic likes and responses. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when Nina announced she wanted a divorce. Nina said firmly, "I can't do this anymore, Mark. We're both miserable. The kids can see it. We need to be honest about what this marriage has become." She'd rehearsed the speech. Her delivery was too smooth, too prepared. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was the execution of a long-term plan. Mark asked, cautiously, "What about counseling?" Nina replied, "We're past that. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I've already spoken to a lawyer." Already spoken to a lawyer. While he'd been working overtime at Walmart to pay for Daisy's school activities and Henry's baseball equipment, Nina had been consulting attorneys and planning his destruction. Mark said carefully, "I want joint custody." Nina responded coldly, "We'll have to see what's best for the children. Daisy's already expressed some concerns about your stability." Gaslighting. Classic manipulation technique. Make the sufferer question his own reality while positioning yourself as the reasonable party. But Mark wasn't a sufferer anymore. He was an investigator, and his target had just made a crucial mistake. In her eagerness to paint him as unstable, Nina had tipped her hand. She was planning to use parental alienation as a custody weapon. That night, Mark listened to the latest recording from Nina's gym bag. She was discussing custody strategy with Logan, mapping out ways to minimize Mark's access to the children. Logan said, "The key is documentation. Make him look erratic, unreliable. Get the kids to say they're uncomfortable with him." Nina responded, "Daisy's already there. Henry's going to be the problem," Logan advised. "Henry's 12. He'll follow his sister's lead if you handle it right." Mark turned off the recording and opened his laptop. Time to shift from passive intelligence gathering to active warfare. Nina wanted to play games with his children's affections. Fine. But she was about to learn that Mark Jensen was better at this game than she'd ever imagined. His first move would be financial. He'd already discovered discrepancies in Logan's gym finances. Cash-only memberships that didn't appear in any official records, equipment purchases that seemed inflated, utility bills that didn't match the facility's actual usage. Logan Price was running a dirty operation, and Nina was about to become an unwitting accomplice. Mark smiled for the first time in months. His wife thought she was playing chess, but she'd brought checkers to a grandmaster's game. Mark's transformation from defeated husband to calculating strategist accelerated over the following weeks. He established a war room in the basement, complete with surveillance equipment, financial records, and detailed timelines of Nina and Logan's activities. Every conversation was documented. Every financial transaction was traced. Every social media post was screenshotted and archived. His first major breakthrough came through Logan's digital footprint. The gym owner was sloppy with technology, using the same password for multiple accounts and failing to enable two-factor authentication on his business email. Mark's old police contacts included a tech specialist who owed him favors, Detective Ray Kowalski, now retired and running a private cybersecurity consultancy. Ray asked cautiously during their clandestine meeting at a truck stop 30 miles outside town, "You sure you want to go down this road? This kind of thing can get messy fast." Mark replied confidently, "It's already messy. I'm just evening the odds." Ray handed him a USB drive. Ray warned, "This software will give you remote access to any device connected to his gym's Wi-Fi network. Email, text messages, financial records, everything." "But Mark, if you get caught," Mark interrupted firmly, "I won't get caught." Within 48 hours, Mark had access to Logan's complete digital life. What he found exceeded his worst expectations. Logan wasn't just having an affair with Nina, he was running parallel relationships with 3 other married women in town. His gym was a sophisticated operation for laundering money from illegal gambling and steroid distribution. And most damaging of all, he'd been systematically recording his sexual encounters without his partner's knowledge. Nina appeared in 17 different video files. Mark felt physically sick watching the first few seconds of the recordings, but he forced himself to document everything. This wasn't about voyeurism, it was about evidence. Logan had created a massive liability for himself, and Nina was about to become collateral damage. The gym review site was Mark's second tactical strike. He created a sophisticated fake platform called fitnesstruthreviews.com and seeded it with carefully crafted complaints about Logan's business practices, sexual maltreatment allegations from anonymous former members, safety violations, fraudulent billing practices. Each complaint was detailed enough to be credible, but vague enough to avoid libel charges. Within a week, the site was ranking high in Google searches for Logan's gym. Prospective members were reading dozens of concerning reviews. Current members were asking uncomfortable questions. Mark's custody preparation was equally methodical. He documented every instance of parental alienation, recorded Daisy's coached responses about his instability, and gathered evidence of Nina's attempts to undermine his relationship with both children. The attack allegation came from an unexpected source. Jessica Martinez, a former gym member, contacted Mark after seeing his review site. She'd been attacked by Logan 6 months earlier but had been too intimidated to report it. Logan had threatened to release compromising photos if she spoke out. "He said no one would believe me," Jessica explained during their secret meeting. "He's got connections with the police department, the city council. Everyone thinks he's this great community leader." Mark's smile was carnivory. "Not everyone." Jessica agreed to provide a sworn statement detailing Logan's attack and subsequent blackmail. Mark helped her contact a sufferer's advocate and connected her with a lawyer who specialized in sexual attack cases. But Logan wasn't passive in this war. 3 days after Jessica filed her complaint, Mark was served with a restraining order based on fabricated threats Logan claimed to have received via anonymous email. The order was comprehensive and devastating. Mark was prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Logan's gym, his residence, or any public event where Logan might be present. He was banned from contacting Logan directly or indirectly. Most crucially, the order painted Mark as an unstable stalker, which Nina's lawyer immediately used to petition for emergency custody modification. Mark lost temporary custody of Henry and Daisy pending a full hearing. The children were ordered to stay with Nina, with Mark's visitation limited to supervised visits twice per week. Watching his kids pack their belongings while Nina supervised with barely concealed satisfaction was the lowest moment of Mark's life. Henry hugged him tightly and whispered, "I know you didn't do anything wrong, Dad." Daisy avoided eye contact entirely. "Maybe this is for the best," she said, echoing words that sounded rehearsed. "You've been acting really weird lately." That night, Mark sat alone in his empty house and realized that conventional warfare wasn't going to be enough. Logan had connections, resources, and the advantage of public sympathy. If Mark was going to win this war, he needed to embrace tactics that his police training had taught him to condemn. He needed to disappear from the board entirely. Mark began planning his psychological end and resurrection. He would become a ghost, invisible to his enemies but capable of striking from the shadows. Nina and Logan thought they'd won by isolating him from his children and destroying his reputation. They had no idea that they'd just liberated the most dangerous version of Mark Jensen, a man with nothing left to lose and unlimited time to plan their destruction. The war was about to escalate beyond anything they could imagine. Mark's disappearance was carefully orchestrated theater. He called in sick to Walmart, citing stress and depression. He stopped answering his phone. He let his lawn grow wild and his mail pile up. To outside observers, Mark Jensen was having a mental breakdown following his divorce and custody loss. In reality, he'd never been more focused. Operating from his basement command center, Mark transformed into a digital phantom. He rented a storage unit under a false name and moved his surveillance equipment there. He purchased untraceable prepaid phones and established new social media identities. Most importantly, he began 24-hour surveillance of Logan's activities. The gym owner had grown cocky following his restraining order victory. He was posting more frequently on social media, flaunting his relationship with Nina and making increasingly bold moves in his underground business operations. Mark's first major intelligence coup came from following Logan to an upscale hotel in the county seat. Logan met with Commissioner Patricia Hayes, a married woman in her 50s who controlled zoning permits and business licenses for the entire county. Through telephoto surveillance and directional microphones, Mark documented their affair in excruciating detail. Patricia Hayes wasn't just sleeping with Logan. She was providing him inside information about upcoming zoning changes, helping him evade health department inspections, and steering municipal contracts to his business associates. Mark compiled the evidence into a devastating video package. Hotel surveillance footage, audio recordings of their conversations, financial records showing suspicious payment patterns between Logan's gym and Hayes' husband's construction company. The video was anonymously delivered to Commissioner Hayes' husband, the local newspaper, and the district attorney's office on the same day. Commissioner Hayes' husband filed for divorce within 48 hours. The newspaper ran a front-page expose about corruption in county government. The DA launched a criminal investigation into Logan's business practices. Logan's response was predictably violent and self-destructive. He began drinking heavily, lashing out at gym members, and making increasingly paranoid social media posts about being persecuted by jealous enemies. Mark's next target was Nina's best friend, Linda Morrison, who had been enabling the affair by providing alibis and emotional support. Linda worked as a records clerk at the county hospital, a position that required strict confidentiality protocols. Through his digital surveillance of Logan's network, Mark discovered that Linda had been accessing patient files without authorization, feeding Logan information about potential gym members' medical conditions so he could target them with specific fitness programs. Mark compiled evidence of Linda's HIPAA violations and forwarded them to the hospital's compliance department. Linda was terminated within a week and faced potential criminal charges for medical privacy violations. The sabotage of Logan's car was Mark's first direct physical action. He waited until 3 a.m., then used his police training to disable Logan's brake lines in a way that would cause gradual failure rather than immediate catastrophe. The goal wasn't homicide, it was psychological warfare. Logan was driving home from a late-night meeting with one of his steroid suppliers when the brakes failed completely. He managed to avoid serious injury by steering into a drainage ditch, but the crash triggered a DUI investigation that revealed methamphetamines in his system. The high-speed confrontation happened 3 days later when Logan, now paranoid and sleep-deprived, spotted Mark's car following him on a rural road outside town. Logan accelerated to over 90 miles per hour, weaving through traffic and running red lights in an attempt to escape his phantom pursuer. Mark maintained perfect pursuit technique, staying close enough to pressure Logan but far enough back to avoid responsibility for the increasingly dangerous chase. Logan finally lost control on a sharp curve, spinning out and crashing into a fence post. When police arrived, they found Logan incoherent and aggressive, claiming that Mark Jensen was trying to eliminate him. But Mark was nowhere to be found. He disappeared into the countryside using back roads that only a lifetime local would know. The crash investigation revealed that Logan had been driving with a suspended license due to unpaid traffic violations. Combined with the DUI and pill possession charges, Logan was looking at serious jail time. But Mark's masterstroke was yet to come. While Logan was distracted by his mounting legal problems, Mark had been gathering evidence of Nina's unwitting participation in the gym's money laundering operation. Nina had been handling Logan's bookkeeping as a favor, not realizing that she was processing payments from illegal gambling operations and steroid sales. Her physical therapy license gave her access to medical databases that Logan had been using to identify potential customers for performance-enhancing pills. Mark compiled the evidence carefully. Financial records showing Nina's signatures on suspicious transactions, email communications discussing special clients, surveillance footage of Nina meeting with known pill dealers at Logan's request. The evidence package was delivered to the state licensing board, the IRS, and the district attorney's office simultaneously. Nina was arrested at her clinic on charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to distribute controlled substances. The surveillance footage of her arrest was broadcast on every local news channel. Nina Jensen, respected physical therapist and devoted mother, led away in handcuffs while her colleagues and patients watched in shock. Mark watched the coverage from his storage unit command center, feeling no satisfaction at his wife's destruction. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about survival. Nina and Logan had declared war on his family, and he was simply ensuring that they experienced the consequences of that decision. But the war was far from over. Logan still had allies, Nina still had legal representation, and both of them were about to discover that their persecution had only just begun. Mark Jensen was no longer playing defense. He was systematically dismantling every aspect of their lives, and his next phase would target the thing they cared about most, their public reputations and social standing. Mark's approach to reclaiming his children required surgical precision. Direct confrontation would only reinforce Nina's narrative that he was unstable and dangerous. Instead, he needed to allow Daisy and Henry to discover the truth organically, guided by carefully planted evidence and strategic revelations. His first ally was unexpected. Mrs. Sarah Chen, Daisy's 8th grade English teacher and the faculty sponsor for the school newspaper. Mrs. Chen had noticed disturbing changes in Daisy's behavior and academic performance following her parents' separation. Mark approached her during a carefully orchestrated chance encounter at the public library, where he'd been researching custody law and child psychology. The woman said sympathetically, "Mr. Jensen, I'm so sorry to hear about everything you're going through." Mark's response was carefully calculated, vulnerable enough to elicit sympathy, but stable enough to demonstrate competence. Mark replied, "It's been difficult, but I'm focused on what's best for the kids. I know Daisy's been struggling." She confirmed, "She has. Her grades have dropped, and she's been writing some concerning pieces for creative writing assignments. Very angry, very focused on themes of betrayal and abandonment." Mark handed Mrs. Chen a manila envelope. "I've been documenting some things that might help explain her emotional state. I'm not asking you to get involved in adult problems. But if there's anything in here that helps you understand what Daisy's going through..." The envelope contained carefully selected evidence, screenshots of Logan's social media posts objectifying women, copies of Nina's text messages discussing how to manipulate the children's emotions, financial records showing that Nina had been spending money meant for school activities on her affair. Mrs. Chen reviewed the materials over the weekend and was horrified by what she discovered. She couldn't take direct action without violating professional boundaries, but she could create opportunities for Daisy to question the narrative she'd been fed. The breakthrough came during a creative writing assignment about family loyalty. Daisy wrote a scathing piece about fathers who abandoned their responsibilities and forced their families to find happiness elsewhere. Mrs. Chen used the essay as a discussion starter about perspective and unreliable narrators. Sometimes people tell us stories about situations where they're not giving us all the information, Mrs. Chen said to the class. How can we tell when someone might be leaving out important details? The discussion planted seeds of doubt that began growing in Daisy's mind. She started paying closer attention to her mother's behavior, noticing inconsistencies in Nina's explanations and the way adults reacted to her family situation. Henry's awakening was more direct. Mark had hidden a digital recorder in his old police gear, which he'd stored in the garage, where Henry often played basketball. Henry discovered the device while looking for a pump to inflate his basketball. The recording was Mark's audio diary, a careful mixture of genuine emotion and strategic information. Mark talked about his love for his children, his confusion about Nina's sudden personality change, and his discovery of evidence that Nina and Logan had been planning to isolate him from his family. I don't understand how Nina became someone who could hurt the kids this way, Mark's recorded voice explained. I found messages where she talks about using Daisy and Henry as weapons against me. She's teaching them to hate their own father to make her affair easier to justify. Henry listened to the entire 2-hour recording, his worldview shifting with each revelation. He'd always been observant, but he'd been too young to understand the adult dynamics destroying his family. The recording gave him context for everything he'd witnessed, but couldn't interpret. The confrontation between Mark and Logan happened sooner than planned. Logan, increasingly paranoid and unstable due to his legal problems and pill use, decided to confront Mark directly despite the restraining order. He cornered Mark in a secluded alley behind the hardware store, bringing 2 of his gym associates as backup. Logan was incoherent with rage, accusing Mark of orchestrating a conspiracy to destroy his life. Logan shouted, "You think you're so freaking smart hiding in the shadows like a coward? I know it's you behind everything." The reviews, the videos, the sabotage, all of it. Mark remained calm, knowing that Logan's associates were recording the confrontation on their phones. Mark said evenly, "I don't know what you're talking about, Logan." "I've been respecting the restraining order," Logan spat. "Bees! You've been stalking me, you damn psycho. You're obsessed with me because your wife prefers a real man." The comment triggered something primal in Mark. 20 years of suppressed police training exploded in a burst of controlled violence. He disabled both associates with precise strikes, then focused on Logan with methodical brutality. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. Logan, despite his size and gym training, was no match for Mark's combination of police defensive tactics and absolute fury. Mark broke Logan's nose, dislocated his shoulder, and left him unconscious in the alley. But Mark had miscalculated. Logan's associates had continued recording throughout the fight, capturing Mark's savage knocking of a man who was technically under a restraining order's protection. The footage was leaked to local news within hours, painting Mark as an unstable ex-cop who had violently attacked a respected community member. The video went viral on social media with edited versions that removed Logan's provocation and made Mark appear to be the aggressor. Mark became infamous overnight. His photo was on the front page of the regional newspaper with the headline, "Violent Ex-Cop Terrorizes Local Businessman." Television news ran segments about domestic violence and the dangers of untreated mental illness. But the viral video also had an unintended consequence. Daisy and Henry saw the unedited footage online, including Logan's cruel taunts about their mother preferring a real man. They witnessed their father's restraint before Logan pushed him too far. They heard Logan's associates laughing about the crazy cop's kids. For the first time since the separation began, Daisy questioned whether her father was really the villain in this story. She started researching the allegations against Logan, discovering news articles about the corruption investigation, the sexual attack complaint, and the pill charges. Henry, armed with knowledge from Mark's audio diary, began asking pointed questions about Logan's role in their family's destruction. Why had their mother never mentioned Logan's criminal charges? Why were they living in a cramped apartment while Logan posted photos of expensive vacations on social media? The children's awakening was accelerated by Nina's increasingly erratic behavior. Facing criminal charges and social ostracism, Nina had begun drinking heavily and lashing out at anyone who questioned her decisions. When Henry asked why they couldn't visit their father more often, Nina's response was telling, "Your father is a dangerous man who's trying to destroy everything good in our lives. Logan is the only reason we have any stability at all." But Henry had heard the recordings. He knew that Logan was the one facing criminal charges. He knew that their father had been working overtime to pay for their school activities while their mother spent money on her affair. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore, and Mark's plan was approaching its final phase. His public destruction had been painful but necessary. It had forced his children to confront the reality of their situation and choose sides based on evidence rather than manipulation. Logan's empire was crumbling, Nina's reputation was destroyed, and Mark's children were beginning to see through the lies they'd been told. But the war's climactic battle was yet to come, and Mark intended to ensure that it would be witnessed by the entire community. Logan's legal problems created a cascading series of business failures that Mark exploited with ruthless efficiency. The corruption investigation had triggered insurance cancellations, municipal license reviews, and vendor contract terminations. Logan's gym was hemorrhaging money, and his attempts to maintain operations through increasingly desperate measures only accelerated its collapse. Mark's planted news story about Logan's insurance fraud was the final nail in the coffin. Using his network of police contacts and carefully fabricated documentation, Mark created evidence that Logan had been filing false claims for equipment theft and facility damage. The story suggested that Logan's recent paranoid behavior was actually guilt over his systematic defrauding of multiple insurance companies. The local newspaper ran the expose on a slow news day, treating it as investigative journalism rather than planted propaganda. Within 48 hours, Logan's business insurance was canceled. His equipment leasing contracts were terminated, and his bank accounts were frozen, pending federal investigation. Logan's arrest for tax fraud was the culmination of months of Mark's financial sabotage. Mark had systematically documented every cash transaction at the gym, every unreported payment, every suspicious financial activity. But rather than simply reporting Logan to the IRS, Mark had created false documentation suggesting that Logan was deliberately concealing income to avoid child support payments from previous relationships. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated enough to pass initial scrutiny while being obviously fake to any detailed investigation. But it didn't need to survive long-term scrutiny. It only needed to provide probable cause for Logan's arrest and the seizure of his financial records. Logan was arrested at his gym during peak hours, with dozens of members and staff witnessing his humiliation. The charges included tax evasion, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. His bail was set at $250,000, which he couldn't afford due to his frozen assets. Nina's custody hearing became a public spectacle due to the media attention surrounding Logan's legal problems. Her association with the disgraced gym owner undermined every argument her lawyer made about providing stability for the children. Mark's attorney systematically demolished Nina's credibility, presenting evidence of her financial crimes, her parental alienation tactics, and her involvement in Logan's illegal business operations. The audio recordings of Nina coaching Daisy to reject her father were particularly damaging. "Your Honor," Mark's lawyer explained, "Mrs. Jensen has systematically undermined these children's relationship with their father to facilitate her extramarital affair with a man who is now facing federal criminal charges. She has exposed them to illegal pill activity, money laundering, and emotional manipulation." Nina's lawyer attempted to portray her as a sufferer of Logan's manipulation, but the evidence was overwhelming. Nina had signed financial documents, handled suspicious cash transactions, and actively participated in Logan's schemes while using her children as emotional weapons against Mark. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Nina was denied primary custody due to environmental instability and demonstrated poor judgment. Mark was awarded full custody, with Nina granted supervised visitation pending the resolution of her criminal charges. The confrontation between Martha Jensen and Nina at the courthouse became an instant local legend. Mark's 62-year-old mother had been quietly supporting him throughout the custody battle, but she'd maintained public dignity despite her fury at Nina's treatment of her son and grandchildren. Martha's breaking point came when Nina attempted to hug Daisy after the custody ruling, whispering something about fighting this decision and getting their family back together. "Don't you dare touch that child," Martha said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. "You've done enough damage." Nina's response was typically manipulative. "Martha, I know you're upset, but we need to think about what's best for the children." Martha's slap echoed through the courthouse hallway, captured by teenagers with smartphones who immediately uploaded the footage to social media. The video went viral within hours, with Martha being hailed as a hero for defending her grandchildren against their manipulative mother. "That's for poisoning my grandchildren against their father," Martha said calmly. "And if you ever try to hurt those babies again, you'll get worse than a slap." The live-streamed confrontation became a rallying point for community members who had been following the Jensen family drama. Public opinion, already shifting due to Logan's criminal charges and Nina's association with his illegal activities, turned decisively against the woman who had destroyed her family for a convicted felon. Logan's phone call from jail was intercepted and recorded by Mark's surveillance equipment. The conversation between Logan and Nina revealed the true nature of their relationship and their plans for revenge against Mark. Logan screamed at Nina, "This is all your fault. If you hadn't been so damn obvious about the affair, none of this would have happened. Now I'm looking at federal prison time because you couldn't keep your mouth shut." Nina's response was equally revealing as she said, "You promised me that Mark would never find out. You said you had connections that would protect us. Now my children hate me, I'm facing criminal charges, and my husband has destroyed both our lives." Logan retorted bitterly, "Your husband didn't destroy anything. You destroyed it when you decided to betray him. And now he's going to pay for making me look like a fool." Logan's threats against Mark were specific and violent, providing evidence that would later be used to extend his prison sentence and justify additional restraining orders. But Nina's next move was desperate and dangerous. Facing the loss of her children, her career, and her freedom, she reached out to Mark with a panicked phone call, begging for mercy and offering to provide evidence against Logan in exchange for his help with her legal problems. Nina pleaded in the call, "Mark, please, I know I hurt you, but we have to think about the children. Logan is threatening to eliminate you if he gets out on bail. He's completely lost his mind. I can help you put him away permanently, but I need you to help me with the prosecutors." Mark's response was carefully measured. "Nina, you made your choice when you decided to destroy our family. Logan is your problem now. You wanted a better man than me? Now you've got a convicted felon who's threatening homicide from jail. Congratulations." The call ended with Nina sobbing and Logan screaming threats in the background of their jail conversation. Mark saved the recording as evidence for the final phase of his war. Logan's gym was officially auctioned off 3 weeks later. The once thriving fitness center that had been the epicenter of his criminal empire sold for a fraction of its value, with the proceeds going directly to creditors and legal fees. Mark attended the auction anonymously, watching as Logan's dreams were literally sold to the highest bidder. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. The man who had promised Nina a better life than Mark could provide was now penniless, facing decades in federal prison and completely abandoned by the community that had once celebrated him as a success story. But Mark's satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge that his war had cost him almost everything. His reputation was destroyed, his career was over, and his relationship with his children would require years to fully repair. He had won the battle by becoming everything he'd once fought against as a police officer. Mark's final gambit required perfect timing and maximum public impact. The town council meeting was scheduled for the third Thursday of the month, with agenda items including budget discussions and a ceremony honoring community heroes who had made positive contributions to local life. Mark had been quietly lobbying for Logan to receive recognition for his fitness programs for at-risk youth, a nomination that was approved before Logan's legal troubles became public knowledge. The irony would be devastating. Logan would be honored as a community hero on the same night his crimes were exposed to the entire town. Mark spent weeks preparing for the confrontation. He compiled video evidence, financial records, audio recordings, and witness statements into a comprehensive presentation that would systematically destroy both Logan and Nina's public personas. But the presentation needed to be more than just evidence. It needed to be theater. The community center was packed beyond capacity for the awards ceremony. Logan's family had driven in from 3 counties to witness his recognition. Nina was there with supervised visitation, sitting uncomfortably near the back with Daisy and Henry. City council members, police officials, and prominent business leaders filled the front rows. Mark entered through a side door during the opening remarks, positioning himself near the audiovisual equipment. He'd spent hours studying the venue's technical setup, identifying vulnerabilities in their security protocols and backup systems. Logan's introduction was effusive praise for his dedication to community wellness and positive influence on local youth. The presenter, unaware of Logan's legal situation, described him as a shining example of entrepreneurial success and civic responsibility. Logan approached the podium with his arm still in a sling from their alley confrontation, but managed to project confidence and gratitude. His acceptance speech hit all the expected notes: humility, dedication to service, commitment to making their community stronger. "I've always believed that we have a responsibility to lift each other up," Logan said, his voice carrying across the silent audience. "This community has given me everything, and I've tried to give back by helping people become the best versions of themselves." Mark waited until Logan was halfway through his prepared remarks before making his move. He triggered his override of the audio-visual system, cutting Logan's microphone and displaying the first slide of his presentation on the room's main screen. The slide was simple but devastating. Logan Price, sexual hunter, pill dealer, financial criminal. The audience erupted in confusion as Mark activated the wireless microphone he'd hidden in his jacket. His voice boomed through the sound system with the authority of someone accustomed to controlling crowds. Mark announced loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but you deserve to know who you're honoring tonight." Logan tried to regain control of the situation, shouting at the sound technician to restore his microphone, but Mark had disabled all other audio inputs. The stage was his completely. Mark continued with commanding intensity. "My name is Mark Jensen. Many of you know me as the unstable ex-cop who attacked this man in an alley 3 weeks ago. Tonight, you're going to learn why that attack was justified and why Logan Price represents everything that's wrong with our community." Mark's presentation was methodical and devastating. He played audio recordings of Logan discussing his systematic seduction of married women. He displayed financial records showing Logan's money laundering operations. He showed video evidence of Logan's pill dealing and his corrupt relationship with county officials. But the most damaging evidence was personal. Mark played Nina's recorded conversations about using their children as weapons against him. He showed text messages where Logan bragged about stealing another man's family and planning to make the kids forget their loser father. The audience was transfixed by the unfolding drama. City council members sat in stunned silence as they watched evidence of corruption involving their colleagues. Parents gasped as they learned about the pill activity their children had been exposed to at Logan's gym. Nina's humiliation was complete when Mark played the jail recording of Logan blaming her for his arrest and threatening to eliminate Mark if he was released on bail. Her attempts to leave the auditorium were blocked by crowd members who recognized her as an accomplice in Logan's crimes. "This man you're honoring tonight," Mark continued, "has systematically corrupted our community while hiding behind a facade of fitness and motivation. He's destroyed families, exploited vulnerable people, and turned our children into weapons against their own parents." Logan's attempt to rush the stage was intercepted by off-duty police officers who had been in the audience. His screaming protests about Mark's lies and fabrications were undermined by the overwhelming documentary evidence being displayed on screen. The presentation climaxed with Mark's revelation of Logan's secret recording system at the gym, showing screenshots of video files involving dozens of local women who had been recorded without their knowledge during private training sessions. "How many of your wives, daughters, and friends were violated by this hunter?" Mark asked the audience. "How many of you trusted your families to a man who was documenting their most vulnerable moments for his personal entertainment?" The crowd's mood shifted from confusion to anger as people recognized the implications of Mark's evidence. Women in the audience began crying as they realized they had been secretly recorded. Husbands and fathers stood up with clenched fists, demanding justice. Logan's final escape attempt was theatrical in its desperation. He broke free from the officers restraining him and charged toward the emergency exit, shouting threats and accusations at Mark. But his path was blocked by Martha Jensen, who had positioned herself strategically near the door. At 62 years old, Martha Jensen stood barely 5 feet tall, but she faced down Logan Price with the fearlessness of someone who had nothing left to lose. "You want to run, you coward?" she said, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "You destroy my son's family, poison my grandchildren against their father, and now you want to slink away like the snake you are?" Logan's response was to shove Martha aside, sending the elderly woman sprawling across the floor. The attack on Mark's mother triggered immediate intervention from multiple audience members, but Mark reached Logan first. The final confrontation between Mark and Logan was witnessed by 300 community members and recorded by dozens of smartphones. Unlike their alley fight, this battle was public, decisive, and completely one-sided. Mark's police training and months of physical conditioning for this moment overwhelmed Logan's gym-enhanced strength. Within minutes, Logan was unconscious on the community center floor, his face bloodied and his expensive suit torn. Police sirens wailed in the distance as Mark stood over his defeated enemy, breathing heavily but completely composed. The audience watched in stunned silence as he helped his mother to her feet and checked her for injuries. "Is everyone getting this?" Mark asked the crowd, gesturing toward the phones recording his every word. "Logan Price, your community hero, just attacked a 62-year-old grandmother because she stood in his way. This is the man you are about to honor for his positive influence on our community." Police arrived just as Logan regained consciousness. Finding him prone on the floor, with multiple witnesses testifying that he had initiated the violence by attacking an elderly woman. His arrest was captured by news crews who had been alerted to the evening's events through Mark's anonymous tips. Logan was charged with attack, battery, violating a restraining order, and making terroristic threats against multiple community members. His bail was revoked, ensuring that he would remain in jail pending trial on all charges. The community center evacuation was orderly but electric with tension. Mark had accomplished his goal of public exposure, but the cost had been enormous. He was facing additional attack charges. His mother was injured, and his children had witnessed their father's complete transformation into someone they barely recognized. As police led Mark away in handcuffs, he caught sight of Daisy and Henry in the crowd. For the first time since the custody battle began, both children were looking at him with something other than confusion or resentment. They were looking at him with understanding. 6 months after the community center confrontation, Mark Jensen sat in his new office reviewing case files for his private investigation firm. The transition from Walmart assistant manager to licensed private investigator had been surprisingly smooth, helped by his police background and the notoriety from his war against Logan Price. His clients were mostly divorce cases and insurance fraud investigations, routine work that paid well and kept him busy enough to avoid dwelling on the cost of his victory. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now professionally doing what he'd done as an amateur against Nina and Logan. The legal aftermath had been surprisingly favorable. Logan was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison on multiple charges, including racketeering, pill trafficking, sexual attack, and conspiracy. The evidence Mark had compiled was so comprehensive that Logan's lawyers advised him to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a longer sentence at trial. Nina received 3 years probation and community service for her role in Logan's money laundering operation. Her physical therapy license was permanently revoked, and she was required to attend counseling for parental alienation. Most importantly, she lost all unsupervised access to Daisy and Henry pending completion of a family reunification program. Mark's attack charges for the community center fight were reduced to misdemeanor battery with no jail time, partly due to Logan's attack on Martha, and partly due to community sympathy for Mark's situation. The judge acknowledged that Mark had been provoked beyond any reasonable person's breaking point. The children's adjustment had been the most challenging aspect of Mark's victory. Daisy, now 15, was attending therapy to process the psychological manipulation she'd experienced from both Nina and Logan. Her grades had improved, and she'd started showing interest in investigative journalism, a career path that made Mark both proud and concerned. "I want to expose people like Logan," she told him during one of their weekly dinners. "I want to make sure other families don't go through what we went through." Henry, now 13, had adapted more easily to their new reality. He'd always been observant and analytical, qualities that helped him understand the adult dynamics that had destroyed their family. His relationship with Mark had grown stronger through shared activities and honest conversations about the divorce. "Do you regret it?" Henry asked during a fishing trip to Lake Michigan. "Everything you did to Mom and Logan?" Mark considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that you and Daisy had to see your father become someone capable of doing those things. But I don't regret protecting our family from people who wanted to destroy us." Martha Jensen had recovered from her injuries, but remained permanently changed by her grandson's war. She'd moved in with Mark to help with the children and provide stability during their adjustment period. Her attack by Logan had made her something of a local folk hero, with strangers regularly approaching her to express admiration for her courage. "That boy needed someone to stand up to him," she would tell anyone who listened. "Sometimes evil only understands violence, and sometimes good people have to become a little evil to protect what matters." Mark's business thrived on referrals from his war against Logan. Betrayed spouses, suspected insurance fraud sufferers, and people seeking justice outside the traditional legal system sought his services. His reputation for thoroughness and his willingness to use unconventional methods attracted clients who had exhausted other options. His most recent case involved a school board member who was embezzling funds from special education programs. Mark's investigation had uncovered a network of corruption involving multiple officials and hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars. The evidence was being compiled for presentation to federal prosecutors. "The difference between what I do now and what I did to Logan," Mark explained to a prospective client, "is that now I'm paid to destroy people who deserve it. Logan and Nina just gave me the training I needed to do it professionally." The community's reaction to Mark's transformation had been mixed, but generally positive. Many residents viewed him as someone who had exposed corruption and protected children from hunters. Others saw him as a dangerous vigilante who had taken justice into his own hands. Mark didn't particularly care about public opinion. He'd learned that community approval was worthless when your family was under attack, and community condemnation was irrelevant when you were protecting what mattered most. His relationship with the children continued to strengthen as they understood more about what had really happened during the divorce. Daisy had apologized for her behavior during the custody battle, explaining that she'd been manipulated into believing things about Mark that weren't true. "I'm sorry I said those things about you, Dad. I'm sorry I believed Mom when she said you didn't love us anymore." "You were a child being manipulated by adults," Mark replied. "You have nothing to apologize for. I'm just glad you can see the truth now." Nina's attempts at family reconciliation had been rejected by both children. They visited her during court-mandated sessions, but the relationships remained strained and formal. Nina's counselor had warned that true reconciliation might take years, if it was possible at all. Logan's family had moved away from the community following his imprisonment. His gym was eventually purchased by a legitimate fitness company that renovated it completely and implemented strict privacy policies. The new owners had asked Mark to conduct background checks on all their employees, a request he'd fulfilled with particular satisfaction. The financial cost of Mark's war had been significant, but manageable. Legal fees, investigation expenses, and lost wages had depleted his savings, but his new business was generating enough income to rebuild his financial security. More importantly, he owned his house outright and had full custody of his children, outcomes that would have been impossible through conventional divorce proceedings. On quiet evenings, Mark would sit in his basement office reviewing old case files and surveillance footage from his war against Logan and Nina. The evidence was archived not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what he was capable of when pushed beyond his limits. The final entry in his personal log was written exactly 1 year after Logan's sentencing. "Justice isn't something that happens to you. It's something you make happen. The system failed my family when it allowed Logan to manipulate the courts and Nina to poison my children against me. I became the system when the real system proved inadequate. I destroyed 2 people completely and irreversibly. I separated a mother from her children and sent a man to federal prison. I turned myself into something I never wanted to become and taught my children that sometimes good people have to do terrible things. Do I regret it? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that Logan and Nina forced me to become someone capable of such systematic destruction. I regret that my children had to learn about betrayal, manipulation, and revenge at such young ages. But I don't regret protecting them. I don't regret fighting for our family when everyone else had written us off. I don't regret becoming a monster to defeat the monsters who were destroying everything I loved." People ask me if I think what I did was right. I tell them that right and wrong are luxuries you can afford when your family isn't under attack. When someone declares war on your children, you don't worry about moral high ground. You worry about winning. Logan Price learned that lesson the hard way. Nina learned it when she lost her children's love. Anyone else who threatens my family will learn it just as comprehensively. I am no longer the man who got married 16 years ago or the man who became a police officer to serve and protect. I'm someone new, someone created by necessity and shaped by war. I am Mark Jensen, and I am exactly who I need to be. Mark closed the file and locked it in his office safe. Outside, he could hear Daisy practicing piano and Henry working on homework. Normal sounds from a normal family, the kind of normal he'd been willing to sacrifice everything to preserve. When clients asked him about his methods, Mark's answer was always the same. Justice doesn't come easy. Sometimes you have to bleed for it, or make others bleed. The man who had been destroyed by betrayal had rebuilt himself as an instrument of justice. Mark Jensen was no longer a sufferer. He was the consequence that followed people who preyed on families like his. And in a world where hunters wore smiles and hid behind community respect, that consequence was exactly what was needed.